Questions from the audience? Go.
I was wondering what types of these men that you were reading about were engaged in. Do you think there was any difference depending on that?
That's actually a very good question. In all of the LARPing that I was looking at, all of the men were engaged in what would be seen as fantasy roleplay. So very similar to a Dungeons and Dragons model. So I really was like, was there anybody doing like a vampire? Or anybody doing anything different? No, there was, given how large Mind's Eye Theater is, that none of the articles and none of the individuals mentioning their LARPing were talking about doing anything outside of things that fell into the RPG, Pathfinder, D&D model of LARPing.
And I assume all line of combat?
Yes. Yes.
I figured, I just thought I'd ask.
Yes. Yes, there was an entire discussion about like, how much like a sword can I make my sword? Which sounds slightly deadly.
Let's have the question from the front, then we'll do yours next, okay?
So have you read about any studies that are correlated to your research of women in the military who have gone into gaming and, using masculine behavior?
No, another good question. I have not, but I can say that in doing a pretty severe research or literary search and literary. Now, there are at least 2 to 3 articles that are talking about women who are involved in gaming. And I kind of phased those out because I was really focusing on this whole idea of masculinity. And honestly, my chair would probably hit that fact because she would say that in order to get a more fulsome picture, I should have looked at that. But I can tell you that really has to be, the articles were not research articles. The articles were generally like, hey, there are women in the military, and guess what? They game. This is how they spend their time in Iraq. So it was very much like, look at this novelty. There are women, they're in the military, and they game. So it's very interesting. I really think that opens a window of research into how masculine are their performances in LARP.
In the back, I still think of you as Virgil. What's your name?
I'm Greg.
Greg. Awesome.
I wanted to ask about these games that these military people are playing. Are they entirely military? Are they entirely ex-military? Are they mixes between military and non-military people?
What I would make some assumption based on what I saw in the readings and some of the Reddit posts is they tended to be majority military or former military. So their connecting point was the fact that they had a military background. That this was sort of letting off steam and being able to do the gender in some way with swords where you didn't have to worry about some company coming to tell you what to do.
And to that point, did you find any information about like military people as like the 1 or 2 very small percentage of the demographic of a LARP, or was it almost all like the majority?
No, generally all the articles were talking about groups that were specifically focused on they were all military or former military. And it's weird because I never thought of it, and you raise a very good point because it's a transitional thing where they all went from the military to former LARP rather than they all joined the LARP. So in one of the academic articles, that's exactly what happened. Like 9 or 10 guys decided, hey, let's start a LARP. And they did. So they kept it very homogeneous.
I know there's a lot of burning questions. I know Sarah has one, but Tomas had his hand up first. So we're going to let him.
This is just a direct follow-up to that question. I was just wondering if it was more Amtgard or more Nero. Is there more character enactment in these games, or is it more of a sport?
I think given the preponderance of fighting, that it was more a sport and a way to act out and perform that aggression with swords that really, because it all involves this whole idea of how the act of warfare, how the performance of warfare has changed. And it's now very impersonal. When they're talking about swords, that's a very personal combat. That it's not about any type of strategic work on X, Y, and Z. It's about, I'm encountering you with a foam sword, which is not really foam, it's plastic, I'm sorry, it hurt. So it's really interesting that it was very much focused on the battle.
Sorry.
2 quick comments or notes on this earlier mentioned topic. There are studies of another role-playing community, the king communities of Northern Europe from the turn of the millennium, where they found hypermasculinity exhibited both by male dominance as well as a large segment of females as well. Sort of behavior which fit really hypermasculine behavior as we understand it. So there might be comparison points. The other is whether you look into how much this is tied to national culture in the sense, because we know that all of the Israeli LARP culture was born out of military groups who started playing together.
Mhm.
So on this hypothesis, almost everyone there should be exhibiting hypermasculinity. They aren't.
No, and that is a very good point, because I will tell you in a lot of my research on military, the American military is unique in many ways. And so I think that a lot of the performance and a lot of the way that how we frame military here, the nature that we frame military here, has a lot to say on what LARP activities and any activities the individuals engage in any sense. So I think that's a very good point.
All right, so we go, Johanna, and did you have still have a question in the back there too? Yes. All right, you'll be out there. Thank you.
So I have a friend who is working in a very senior position at CCP, who is a company who makes an online role-playing game called EVE Online. And EVE Online is a hardcore gamer game that people invest a lot of time in. It's about space trade and logistics, and there's a lot of like fighting and commanding troops and organizing players in battle. The players are very committed, they put a lot of time in. And she said that they have a very significant veteran presence in this game, and that these veterans also self-organize into, for instance, support for each other. So they, within the confines of the game, they are able to have like debrief talks about, like also sort of process some of their experiences from the military inside this kind of magic circle of the communications around EVE Online. So this is, I guess, a question to both of you. I would ask you to reflect on that, Brodie, both from your perspective and Stephen from yours. Are there other aspects? Now we're talking about performance and masculinity, but LARPing is also about community and structure and purposeful activities and having goals and all of that stuff. Can you talk to this? What does it mean to think, Brodie?
Can you restate one sentence?
Oh, well, we can start with Stephen, but I just meant that there is, LARP has all of these other qualities that it also brings to people that veterans might actually find useful. And if, I mean, I know it's going to be speculation from both of you, but can you think aloud of what those things might be?
The role of community as it intersects with masculinity and hypermasculinity.
In LARP?
Well, I think there's definitely some, in certain LARPs, there are definitely some elements that are very much militaristic in their model that are not necessarily represented in the out-of-military community. And so the LARP allows, similar to, I read a study of individuals who did military reenactments. And there are a number of veterans who do military reenactments, all to get that feel of being back in a regiment again. So I think you are correct in the sense that there's some vestiges, there are some echoes of things that used to be, and there are also some echoes of things that could have been. Meaning that, hey, if I were in the act of war 700 years ago, maybe this is what it would have been like. And the ability, something that I saw you brought up EVE Online, that when I was looking at World of Warcraft, veterans who played World of Warcraft, they still have the ability to tell war stories. So the ability to engage in this narrative war story in a completely different field, term Bordeaux would use, but they created these war stories and they were able to sit around with beer, with brand new war stories because their old stories were getting old, and it's about a different field, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, plenty of people should have therapy, and you can see in their enactment that game when they bring dysfunction to that space, make themselves vulnerable, and then start getting hit on that. Where the problems they're having in the game are the same problems they're having outside of it. I think there are opportunities in that space, particularly like a combat game, to be able to be a teacher.
My background is for 25 years police and teaching at the police academy, and I'm amazed at the parallels we're discussing here, but I have to touch on hers about therapy for just a second, because it's been my experience to find that when I have a lot of people come out of the military go into police work, one of the similarities of it, and I have found running on a LARP that my military and officers that are dealing with some minor form by no means a blanket statement. They have communicated to me that it has helped them immensely to come out and LARP as a transition from this hyper-male, hyper-masculinity intenseness back to the civilian world. They enjoy coming out to LARP as kind of a transition back into decompressing their mind. Has nothing to do with my original question, but I had to touch on that because that's a very good perspective. My question and my comment is, I see in my training at the police academy and police work, the hyper-masculinity of my female cadets, and I'm wondering, I'm just going to go on the assumption out on a limb that the women in the Army training experience that same type of compulsion, if not outright pushing into the hypermasculinity mode. And I'm wondering, did your study, did your research find that they also transitioned into the LARP with their male counterparts as they kind of are evolved into this additional hypermasculinity back in the civilian world?
I think it's a good point. I will say that I didn't look at women. I excluded women. It's horrible, I'm sorry.
For a point.
But there's a lot of research that supports that. I'm thinking of one article off the top of my head that actually is talking about women in the police force and talking about how they deal with situations of being taken advantage of by male police officers. And the feminist who wrote it said there are 4 ways they normally deal. And one is just to push it away, one is just to roll with it like it's a joke, one is to report, and one is to seek outside assistance. And what that article pointed out is that when individuals try to engage with the idea or reinforce that this is wrong and something happened, that these women face retaliation. And that is something that happens in the military with men who go against ideas that are meant to get them in line too. Because what we find is a lot of the individuals who are performing these acts are saying, well, I'm doing this to everybody, so it's not just because you're X, Y, and Z. So I would assume that based on the information that I've seen, that the ways that men in these hypermasculine circumstances and the ways that women deal are the same, because of the total institution indoctrination, what Goffman called the degradation ceremony. It's the same thing, regardless of one's gender or gender expression.
Thank you for your answer.
So, as a white privileged, gay, Vietnam War surviving male who plays a badge in Warcraft, do you find any masking going on?
Can we clarify the term a little bit first, just in case not everyone is familiar with it? Would you like to clarify?
Well, masking is overacting essentially to appear to be like your comrades when you're not anything like your comrades, to fit.
Well, being a gay black, whenever I see hypermasculinity, I'm kind of always like, really? But there is this concept that there is overcompensation, but from an academic point of view, I can't jump to it. But there are definite circumstances in reading narratives of individuals who point out, when they're talking about their coming out process in the military, that they overcompensate to remove all doubt and suspicion. So the assumption that I can make, having not researched this, is that yes, there definitely is a level of masking that has to be going on, simply because it's a very comfortable place individuals can hide, and it becomes a default. People think that it becomes this performance. It really doesn't become a performance for these individuals. It's a default. They're doing what they were taught to do. And because they're doing what they were taught to do, it doesn't take as much effort as for those of us who are outside for them to do it. Because all they're doing is acting within the constraints of what their basic training said they're supposed to. If they give a little bit more energy, run a little bit faster, shoot a little bit more, hit a little bit harder, drink a little bit more, then people will not wonder. But the moment you drop that, and that's what we talk about in looking at these ideas of non-hegemonic behavior, there's always a feeling and a fear that somebody will start to wonder. And we do see in other research looking at masculinity that if you lose that hegemonic ideal, there's a perception that you can never get it back. That once it's gone, it's gone. That as soon as that doubt is there, even if you overcompensate, people are like, well, there was that one day when you kissed so-and-so, and I don't know if you were drunk or not, but there's this thought that it's always in the back of somebody's mind.
That is very true. I will go with Gabriel, and then I'll cry, because there's so many beautiful people with great questions. I know Jason's been waiting for forever, so we'll start with Gabe and then go to Jason, and then we'll see who still has questions.
The thought seems interestingly tied to the practices and concepts around the idealization of virginity. Very interesting, plausible to be taken there. Nerdy methodological questions going into this as academic. And I also want to give a huge set of props to Brodie as a undergraduate doing this kind of research. Undergraduate research is an extraordinarily invalidated place for research because the academic focus on MDs and PhDs being the only ones who are quote unquote qualified to do the deep thinking. So I want to give huge props to Brodie for doing the work that he's doing. So to the nerdy part of the question, and then the question that will extend out to the both of you. Brodie, what was it that made you eliminate any of your respondents out of the 327 that you had said there, and you dumped it down to 197 or so?
Closer to completed.
Okay.
Once I got into it, I realized the groups that emerged were, I mean, that's also part of it is not just, because it has to be intersectional. And that's part of the analysis, is finding intersectional identities and common intersectional problems. So I took all comers, but in the original analysis, that meant like the people who were you know, I can't think of any nice words to describe it. The people who said there wasn't a problem. And then emerging, those intersectional identities that emerged. So those were included, but those were, again, considered as part of like a counter-analysis. They were considered as evidence of why these ideas aren't being pushed forward, in addition to the narrative of what people want to see change, or to stop these people from change.
So then to follow up methodologically for the both of you, in an effort to push back against the continued prioritization of written language as the form or targeted space for research, will either of you ever get to interaction analysis, forms of gestures and embodiment that you could follow through on analysis of video data, or perhaps deeper levels of linguistic analysis past narratives and rhetoric?
Because we're talking about an embodied medium, I would love that. I would love to be able to do that. I don't know where to find the resources to be able to do that.
Email me.
And also, I mean, with that is getting proper representation too, getting enough people active to be able to do that, and then getting intersectional identities. For those who weren't in the Gaming as Other panel yesterday, there was just like how should I describe it? An authentication, like from a token individual. Can I get the Hispanic pass on this? Like, I don't want to claim a single person for that analysis, or get like a small sample size for that, and consider that to be representative of everyone who has that identity. But yeah.
And Stephen, are you going to carry your analysis any deeper?
Oh, good, I get to be the other side of the spectrum. No! My thing is that my process, discourse analysis and sociolinguistics is not where I started. For me, this is very much a long tread road where I've been analyzing other things and other things from a sociological model. And there's just so much in language. And to look at themes and analysis of themes, especially for marginalized populations. And that is what I've been doing for most of my work. That when I met Sarah at the PCA last year, it's not because I was doing anything in game studies. I was doing a presentation on Bronies and the language that Bronies use, which led me to game studies because game studies seemed interesting and something I was always interested in, but here I am. But the fact is that looking at the communication patterns, especially of men, and how men have to reform, and given the nature of changes that are going on right now among men, how men are modifying their language. I think it's very important to study. And whereas I definitely see the value of semiotic analysis and the analysis of other forms. There's somebody in my PhD cohort who is doing his comps right now, and he is specifically looking at discourse analysis that's not words. And so he's doing exactly what you're saying. But for me, I think, given that this is like the end of my very long journey, I think there is a value in sociolinguistics coming from a person of color, because a lot of sociolinguistics is about people of color, not done by people of color. So coming from a person of color, tying that into linguistic anthropology, which is a, once you jump into those waters, you wonder, you see how amazing they are. And being able to come up with an analysis that shows that there's a power relationship, or do, that is something that we take for granted, but is extremely, extremely marginalized.
So here's what I think we're gonna do. Because we only had 2 panelists, we've had an exceptionally long amount of time, and I'm still gonna let you talk, Jason, just so I'm clear on that. But what I think we're gonna do is we're gonna have Jason and maybe one more public question, and then the adoring fans can pile down here, and then we'll try to get it resolved on a more individual basis, just so that everyone has the time to say what they want to / need to say. Because otherwise, not that it's not valuable to the group discourse, we'll be screwed. So, and I think that's how we're gonna roll with it. We're gonna do Jason and then one more question, and then we're gonna have some individual talking time before I put you all out of the room. Jason, what you got?
So a question for Brodie about, as being personally a staff member of a gaming organization, that I personally fit your dominant model to a T with the exception of my age. And I'm in a group that values diversity and inclusivity. You mentioned that, the spending of social capital members in the dominant group there. Do you have any thoughts or examples of effective means of spending that social capital besides just standing up and saying, we value it?